Let any fish who meets my gaze learn the true meaning of fear, for I am the harbinger of death, the ban of creatures subaqueous. My rod is true and unwavering as I cast into the aquatic abyss. A man, scorned by this uncaring earth, finds solace in the sea, my only friend. The worm upon my hook, wriggling, writhing, struggling to surmount the mortal pointlessness that permeates this barren world. I am alone. I am empty. And yet, I fish. So, this is Dredge, an eldritch horror fishing game. Pretty unique, right? Fishing minigames are all the rage nowadays, but games where fishing is the point aren't nearly as popular. There's probably a good reason for that.
There we go.
Dredge, however, tries to buck this trend by adding tension to the formula through horror. Horror is probably a strong word. Alien Isolation and Amnesia are horror games. Now, Dredge definitely has great atmosphere, but you're not ever going to really be jump scared. For the most part. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's go back to the beginning. You're the new angler in town, and as you're boating into dock, your ship is dashed against the rocks and rendered useless. Luckily, you're able to actually dock the now useless vessel, and we meet the mayor of this town, which is called Greater Marrow. The mayor's offered to loan us out a ship because, without a fisherman, the protein intake of the townsfolk would severely diminish. We, of course, have to pay him back for the ship, but at least we have something. This debt serves as a way to restrain us to the starting area. We don't want to venture out too far because the time spent traveling would be better served sticking close by to catch fish, sell them off, and pay off our debt. That's the setup of Dredge. Before we get too much further, let's talk about the visuals. Dredge employs a very minimalistic yet effective art style. It's not photorealistic, and it's not trying to be. It reminds me a little bit of Disco Elysium or The Long Dark, The Flame and the Flood. It's almost what I would describe as watercolor. It's definitely not going to blow you away, but the simplicity of it all is quite charming. Although the game doesn't need to look all that detailed in the first place because you won't be looking at the environments most of the time. For a majority of the game, you're going to be looking at inventory screens shuffling around cargo, or talking to NPCs, or fishing. All of the asset art gets the job done. As you progress through the game, you'll get new fishing rods, crab pots, and motors. The game does a pretty good job of communicating what each item does just by looking at it. For instance, just by looking at all the different fishing rods, you can probably tell which are the higher tiered ones versus the lower tiered. Again, it's function over form. A lot of time and care in this department went to the character and fish design, a wise decision. There are a lot of fish in this game, and all of them look distinct, even subsects of the same species. Where they really knocked it out of the park were the twisted versions of these fish. For nearly every fish in the game, there's a weird counterpart. I can imagine that this was a big task to take on from an art design perspective. You have these fish, most of which are based off of real-life species, and then you need to design a fish based off the real-life counterpart that also stays in line with the Lovecraftian themes, while also staying in the ballpark of the original design. I didn't find every single fish in the game, but in every instance I saw, they knocked it out of the park in this regard. The devs got very inventive with the aberrations and inflictions on some of these fish. They're just the right dose of weird and unsettling for this style of game. Now, while most of the game will be spent interacting with sea creatures, You'll also need to interact with other humans, whether that be merchants, quest givers, or just general townsfolk. There's only a dozen or so NPCs you'll be interacting with, so that means the artists were really able to give a lot of energy into the designs. This is where the game reminds me the most of Disco Elysium. A lot like the fish, some character designs are mundane and completely unremarkable, not in a bad way, while others are a bit weirder. Besides all of the love that was put into the art, I think the game's strongest characteristic from a visual perspective is the lighting. You'll be exploring multiple biomes throughout your journey, and they all feel distinct in large part due to the changes in lighting. It was important that they nailed this aspect because you're warned from the beginning not to venture too far out at night. And yeah, night is very dark. With the starting lamp, you can see about 5 feet in front of you, but even once I had my ship decked out as bright as it could possibly be, I still didn't feel completely safe at night. If I had to dish out any criticism about the visuals, it's that while traveling from place to place, it can feel a little mundane. We'll talk about the structure of the game later, but the crash course is that there are 5 main zones in the game, 1 at each corner, and the 5th right in the center of the map. While each area feels distinct, save maybe the Marrows and Gale Cliffs, traveling between these areas isn't always the most exciting prospect visually. That is just part of traversing an ocean. Newsflash, it's a lot of water and not much else, but aside from the occasional random event out at sea, it's a pretty static experience. Luckily, Dredge is optimized to near perfection. It's not like it needed a lot of horsepower anyway, but I never ran into any stuttering, crashes, or technical issues. Okay, let's talk about sound. There's not a whole lot going on in the sound department, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I keep coming back to this word, but minimalist is how I would describe it. For one, there's essentially no voice acting in the game. Sure, when you begin conversation with an NPC, they'll have a little stinger line like a grunt or exclamation, but no words come out. It probably wasn't worth recording dialogue with how little of it there is. On the music side, most tracks employ a simple set of strings and piano. Less is more in this case because some of these tracks are absolutely fantastic. There would be times that I was sailing the ocean and this perfect melancholic track would come on and it would be this great moment where it felt like I was in a painting. Truly special stuff. Most of what you're going to be hearing in Dredge are all the ambient sounds. The reel of a rod, the drop of a crab pot, the swishing of a net, or the turn of a motor in the water. These all get the job done and do a great job of giving you a sense of place as you're out on the ocean. While the daytime is bright and cozy, that all changes once nighttime hits. Suddenly, things aren't so inviting and relaxing. You hear whispers all around you, the music takes a dark turn, and you have the strong desire to get the hell away. Again, a huge part of this game is selling the dangers of the night, and that can only be done through great ambience like this. So, what's the game all about? Well, let's go back to the beginning. Our first step is to pay our debt off. Anytime we bring back fish to sell, a portion of those sales will go towards paying the debt off on our ship. Well, no time to waste, so let's get to fishing. We undock and begin our journey. The first thing you'll notice is the way this game handles time. It only passes if your ship is moving or you're fishing. If you're staying still, looking through your inventory or reading the encyclopedia, no time passes. When you are moving, though, time passes pretty quickly. I never really timed it, but I couldn't see the day lasting more than 10 minutes of real-world time. This system provides some advantages to the player. It would suck to be playing Loot Tetris, then you look up and it's dark out and you're stranded at sea. On the other hand, it creates sort of a time paradox because, as we'll get into later, you're not the only one out there. So if you're staying still, watching something else move, it is technically creating a time paradox as that thing is moving while no time in the world is passing. I point that out, but it's not really a big deal. You can take the game at your own pace, save a couple of side quests. As you're traveling, you'll come across hotspots of fish. They're denoted by swirling bubbles as well as the silhouettes of whatever fish are housed there. I went into this game with almost no knowledge, and one thing that threw me for a loop is the lack of RNG here. Each spot houses a single species of fish. This gives the player a lot of control as they'll be able to seek out specific fish with little friction from the game. Once you've pulled up to a spot, you begin fishing. Another thing that may surprise you is that there's no waiting game to play here. As soon as you interact with the spot, you get a bite. A minigame begins that will see you timing button presses when this circle reaches one of the green zones. The thing is, you don't have to play this game at all. It will progress without you having to do anything, but that will waste a lot of time. That's obviously a bad thing because a huge part of this game is maximizing your time. It's just an interesting way to handle things. Once you've caught the fish, you'll need to make space for it in a Resident Evil 4 style inventory system. In the beginning, fish will be easy to stack as they just take up a 1x2, 2x2, or 1x3 space. Eventually, though, you're going to really have to play some Tetris moving items around, especially considering your cargo also shares space with your motor, rods, and lights. Besides catching fish, you'll eventually gain the ability to dredge. Dredging will net you non-fish related things such as lumber, metal scrap, research parts, and treasure. Once you're full up on fish and sea trash, it's time to put it all to use. The fish you'll most likely be selling, although many of the quests in the game require you collecting certain fish. You're not incentivized to stockpile them though, because the fish will rot over time. You'll be able to use the lumber and metal scraps to upgrade your ship. This includes reinforcing the hull so it can take more damage, increasing cargo space, and increasing the amount of space on your ship dedicated to rods, motors, and lights. The upgrade system's really cool. It changes the way your ship looks over time. However, the pace of upgrades is atrocious. I had my ship fully decked out about halfway through the game. With the research parts, you'll be able to spend time to research new motors, rods, crab pots, and lights, which will then be available for purchase at the merchants. I found that these were much harder to come by as opposed to the upgrade materials. By endgame, I probably had about 75% of the research completed. There's one final aspect to ship upgrades, and those are the ship powers. We'll get more into it later as it heavily relates to the game's plot, but in short, these imbue your ship with these supernatural abilities. All of them have a very make a deal with the devil vibe to them, but some are actually pretty mundane. The first one you get, for instance, is sold as this power from the depths that imbues your ship with supernatural speed, but be warned because overuse could have disastrous consequences for your vessel. It turns out it just adds nitro to your ship, which is cool. If you overuse the nitro, it will damage your ship. A little bit oversold there. On the other hand, the three other powers you get are much weirder. One allows you to teleport back to the starting area, conveniently located at the center of the map. One allows you to stave off enemies, and one allows you to kill and collect all fish in the area. While the nitro power is mundane, it's definitely the one you'll be using the most. While the eldritch aspect of this is oversold, at least there's a consequence for using it. When you receive the other powers mentioned, you're always warned to use them sparingly. That's a common theme in Lovecraftian media. Reaching for those powers beyond comes with a price. For all powers outside of the nitro boost, they're just put on a cooldown timer. Not super interesting, and it doesn't play into the eldritch horror component of the game at all. Pretty disappointing. In almost every other way besides this, Dredge is great at doing the whole Lovecraft thing. As I said before, Dredge isn't an insanely terrifying game. Like all great Lovecraftian media, it sneaks up on you without you even knowing it. If someone were watching or playing without hearing the elevator pitch of Dredge, they would think it's a pretty mundane, relaxing, cozy fishing game. It's once you slowly start investigating and peeling back that you discover the dark undertones of the world. By the end of the game, it is on some pretty insane shit, but in the opening hours, it's just the right amount of weird. Sort of like another great cosmic horror-themed game, Bloodborne. Besides strange and dangerous things coming out to play at night, you also have to manage your sanity once the fog rolls in. This is indicated by an eye that appears at the top of your compass. Resting in a town or sailing during the day will slowly remove the sanity you've gained from your night excursions. I'm not sure what happens if your sanity meter goes to max, mine never got there. You are incentivized to go out at night, that's when the really valuable fish come out to play. It's classic risk-reward design, executed to perfection here. Fish during the day when it's safer, but the catches net me less, or brave out the night. Most of the time I find myself braving out the night because the game isn't all that punishing. There's no difficulty options, so in my run I only died once, and that was because I destroyed my ship by running into too many rocks. The damage system here is pretty interesting. Whenever you hit something, or something hits you, a specific part of your ship takes damage. Saying that out loud it may seem obvious, but let me explain. Sometimes when you take damage, it's just the hull that gets hit. This is essentially your health. The damage will also shrink your cargo space as it renders some ship storage unusable. However, If the part of the storage that gets damaged contains your rod, for instance, then say bye-bye to fishing until you can get it repaired back in town. The same goes for your lights and your motor. If the part of your ship that gets damaged contains a fish, then your catch will fall overboard. This is a much more interesting way to do damage to the ship instead of the run-of-the-mill system found in other games. Unfortunately, in the grand scheme of everything, this damage system doesn't matter because the game is, as stated before, pretty breezy, even at night. The tension of the night is great, but once you start to poke and prod at it, it ends up not being all that threatening. For instance, there's a chance your lights go out at night if your sanity drops low enough. This is very bad news because the amount of light your ship outputs affects how slowly your sanity meter fills. However, you're able to just turn the light back on like nothing even happened. I get that the light turning out is supposed to be a figment of your imagination, an effect that the fog is having on you rather than it actually going out, but why even bother with this if it can be undone with the click of a button? All of this, of course, doesn't take away from the night's great atmosphere and ambience, but I would love to see a hardcore mode added post-launch that really cranks up how fast your madness meter fills. And during the day, there's essentially no tension, at least not until later areas. This ultimately works in the game's favor. The still calmness of the day reinforces the night, and being able to have a break from the tension is welcome. Dredge is largely exploration-focused. There is a story here which we'll get into shortly, but after you pay your debts off, you can explore the map freely. There's always a new island or landmark on the horizon, and most every location will reward you with unique fish, materials to dredge, or an interesting NPC or location to interact with. Exploration is the bread and butter of this game, really. The fishing is interesting, but the game is much more about the idea of fishing rather than being a true-to-life hardcore fishing simulator. As you might have expected, most of the quests you'll be given in Dredge center around catching certain fish. Maybe you'll have the equipment necessary to immediately pursue the catch, or maybe you'll need to do some research beforehand. Most of the time, quests will have you catch fish that are in the local area, so you're probably going to never have to travel too far to catch what you're looking for. Fishing quests aren't the only type here, though. Some will have you dredging for specific artifacts and treasure. Some will have you stockpiling certain resources, and some are as simple as traveling from A to B to relay a certain piece of information. None of the quests are mind-bogglingly good. The best storytelling in Dredge is the environmental kind. What's the ship doing here? What's this campsite for? What do these symbols mean? It's the mystery that drives Dredge, not the moment-to-moment gameplay. Quest rewards range from treasure to research materials to books. And books are interesting. You'll read them slowly over time, and once they are read, they'll give you some sort of small bonus. Some make it to where you're less likely to wipe out a population from overfishing. Some books give you better prices with merchants, and others increase your chances of catching larger fish. When I first encountered the books, I figured we'd have a limited number of slots to assign to them, so we couldn't get benefits from all the books at once, but I was wrong about this. You don't have to pick and choose. Once you've read it, it stays with you forever. This makes books one of the most valuable resources in the game, as they can't be purchased or dredged. I'd categorize Dredge's core gameplay loop as pretty good, but it definitely has its issues. There are obviously a lot of progression mechanics baked into Dredge, from the research tree to the supernatural powers to the books, but this progression isn't paced out all that well. The pacing of the game in general is quite weird, which we'll get more into later, but as someone who explored a good bit but didn't have an interest in scouring every little nook and cranny here, I'd completely upgraded my ship about halfway through the game. The upgrades do feel really good though. Just look at the speed difference from an early game ship to an in-game ship. You definitely feel the difference, and you can even see visual upgrades on the ship. I just wish the progression was doled out at a better pace. Part of the progression problem can be blamed on the trivial difficulty of Dredge. I quickly found myself having oodles of cash, much more than I would ever reasonably need. At that point, I stopped fishing unless I was looking for a particular catch. Once you get to the endgame, there's no reason to dredge for materials anymore. In fact, you're actually punished for it. You can't sell lumber or metal, so you just have to discard it unless you want it to clog up your cargo space. Look, I'm not saying that it should sell for much, but it's a bummer that the player's punished for dredging after reaching the endgame. It's just a waste of time. The final thing I want to talk about concerning gameplay is the UI. I contemplated putting this in the visuals section, but I ultimately decided to put it here because it's not that the UI looks bad, but rather plays bad. To see what I mean, let me show you what a town looks like. Okay, the fish market, that's easy to understand. But what's the difference between the floating dock and the shipyard? One acts as an equipment merchant and the other houses the upgrade tree for the ship. Not intuitive in the slightest. And you interact with this stuff a lot. Even after a full playthrough of the game, I can't remember which one is which just from looking. The poor design is extended to the crab pots. You'll unlock these early in the game and they allow you to make passive income, much like the crab pots in Stardew Valley. The difference here is that they need to be repaired and maintained, so you'll need to take them out of the water every so often and bring them back to town. Look at the crab pot menu here. One of these buttons just picks up the crabs from the pot, and the other takes the crabs and the pot. Could you tell which one is which just by looking? This isn't a translation issue either. This studio's based out of New Zealand. The menus just weren't thought through all that much. Okay, finally, we've got the story. Going back to the beginning, we need to pay our ship debt off. We do this by fishing around the local area. This introduces us to the basic fishing and dredging mechanics present in the game. Once we've got the ship paid off, we're told to head to the nearby Blackstone Isle. Now I'm going to put a timestamp on the screen to skip through all this, because everything moving forward is spoiler territory. We head to Blackstone Isle and meet the Collector. He wishes to make a deal with us, asking us if we'll collect a few items he lost at sea over the years. In return, he'll upgrade our ship for us. The upgrades the Collector gives us are the aforementioned ship powers. The Collector's the most mysterious person we've met so far, and his introduction marks the beginning of the heavy Eldritch themes present throughout the rest of the game. He says we'll need to find 5 different items: a ring, a necklace, a watch, a key, and a music box. He tells us to ask around for where we could find these items, and he sends us on our way. This is how a lot of Dredge's questing works. It's all very free form. This both helps and hurts the game. It's cool to just wander the ocean looking for treasure and fish, but there were a few times here and there where I found myself sort of drifting, waiting around for something to appear in front of me. What I discovered was always interesting, but the game does have a few bottlenecks where the path of progression requires what is in essence grinding. We head back on over to the starting area, and after spending some more time fishing and questing, we get a good lead on where to find the items. There is a large shipwreck behind the Marrows, and at night there's a large purple-reddish beacon emitting from it. So we head there one night, and behold, we find our first item, a key. We take this back to the Collector, and he rewards us with the haste power, which is the aforementioned nitro boost. Boring, but probably the most useful upgrade in the game. He's disappointed that we only found the key. He hypothesizes that the other pieces must have drifted further than he thought over the past few years. His intuition tells us that there's another piece to the southeast, at the Gale Cliffs. He suggests we head there next. This all goes back to the free-form nature of Dredge. Taking a look at the map, we can see 5 distinct regions. The developers have an intended path for the player, but you could tackle these in any order. For my playthrough, I just went where the Collector told me. So we head to the Gale Cliffs, and it's a whole new set of people with a whole new set of problems and jobs for us. This is how the game's designed. You explore a region, making money and questing, but once you're done with that area, there's little reason to come back. Obviously, we have to go back to Blackstone Isle to give the Collector the artifacts we find, but other than that, there's very little reason to return to the previous regions, other than for the unique merchants that are housed there. For instance, you can only sell treasure to the pawn shop in Little Marrow, you can only buy explosives from the Whaler in Gale Cliffs, and you can only buy bait from the Airmen in Twisted Strands. Here in Gale Cliffs, the storyline is centered around a pair of estranged brothers. One is living alone, shunned by his brother, the Whaler, because he lost the family crest. We agree to fish it out for him to help repair their relationship between the two. Gale Cliffs represents the first ratchet intention in Dredge's formula. The Marrows were pretty safe, but here, there's a Leviathan lurking in the waters around the cliffs. There's a lot of fish and loot within the cliffs, but we have to be careful not to stay too long, else the Leviathan will damage our ship. From here on out, each new region will have a novel threat that we have to navigate around. In true Lovecraftian fashion, there is no overcoming the enemy, only circumventing them. At least, for now. We find the family crest and reunite the brothers. For our help, the Whaler will now sell us explosive charges. These are helpful for clearing debris around the cliffs, and with this we're able to extract the second item, the lockbox. We return the lockbox to the Collector, and he rewards us with the manifest power. This will allow us to fast travel back to Blackstone Isle anytime we wish. It's not overly useful, but if we ever need to return to sell treasure or turn in the next relic, it saves the headache of traveling all the way back. The collector then instructs us to travel to Stellar Basin. We head that way, and this is the first time the environment really changes. Gale Cliffs and the Marrows are pretty similar. They have that classic American East Coast vibe present in a lot of Lovecraftian media. Here in Stellar Basin, it's much more tropical. We explore around for a bit and find that there's a large tentacle monster in the basin, and it hits pretty hard. The area is pretty easily circumvented, though. We find a research outpost that houses the last remaining person in the area. She explains that she and her team were working on a device that would neutralize the monster in the basin, and we agree to help her repair it. This is where I ran into a huge roadblock with Dredge. It might seem like everything's going by pretty quickly, but that's because I'm skipping over all the fishing, the upgrading, and the questing. I probably spent 2 hours in the Gale Cliffs area alone. The creature in the basin was guarding the shipwreck with the relic I needed to advance the plot, but I had to research a higher tier fishing rod to be able to dredge the relic out of the water. I spent the next hour of gameplay wandering the oceans, looking for research parts I didn't have so I could progress the story. This stopped the game in its tracks, and this hour of aimless wandering, crossing my fingers that I would pull a research part, was a really unpleasant time. Eventually, we do upgrade our rod and are able to procure the next item, the band. We take this back to the collector and receive the banish power in return. This will make hostile creatures flee from us, and besides the nitro boost, it may be the most useful power in the game. He then directs us to search in the Twisted Strands, which for my money is the best area in the game. The Twisted Strands is a maze-like swamp, and its gimmicks change the gameplay up the most out of all the areas. Gale Cliff's Leviathan was dynamic but easy to avoid, and the basin creature was static. All you have to do is boat around it. Here in the Strands, it's almost always foggy and hazy. The maze is nearly unknowable, and the creatures housed within can sneak up on you without you even really knowing. After exploring around here for some time, we come across a plane crash and we meet the airman. He's my favorite character in the game, and he definitely has the best story. His whole squad went down here, and he's the only survivor. He wants to avenge his squad mates by killing the creatures that lurk around the Twisted Strands. He asks us if we'll help, and we accept. Our job is to salvage the other plane wrecks to find parts to build a mortar, and then collect fish to bait out the creatures. We need to set 3 bait spots in total. Once we do, the airman will fire his mortar on the creatures. We bring back proof of the kills, and in return, the airman gives us a necklace he found here in the swamps. It just so happens to be the exact necklace we're looking for. We offer to take the airman with us, but he declines. He says the swamps are his home now, and he wouldn't know how to adapt to the normal world. We take the necklace back to the collector. He gives us the atrophy power, which kills all fish in the local area and nets us several catches in the fraction of the time it would take to fish them all out. Now we're on to the final relic, and by extension area, of the game, Devil's Strand, for which we must collect the music box. Devil's Strand is a volcanic biome situated in the ruins of an ancient civilization. As the last area of the game, Devil's Strand is a test of the player's knowledge and skill. Turns are tight. If you're not paying attention, you'll be dashed against the crumbling walls and pillars of this mysterious civilization that was. Devil's Strand also holds the most aggressive threats in the game. These molten piranhas that will track you down and repeatedly slam into the underbelly of your ship. They're really annoying, but much more manageable when using your banish power. Devil's Strand sees us coming into contact with a cultist who needs our help finishing up a ritual of some sort. We spend some time collecting eternal flames from the 3 shrines scattered around Devil's Strand and return to the cultist. Here he self-sacrifices himself to whatever dark god he worships, and left in his wake is the music box we've been looking for. Devil's Strand is almost certainly the worst area in the game. It's the most annoying, the most arduous. Luckily, if you've played your cards right, you won't need to spend much time here in the first place. Because of the progression issues mentioned earlier, I was already fully kitted out by the time I reached Devil's Strand, and I felt the game was getting a bit long in the tooth by this point, so I just blasted through this final area. I probably spent about 30 minutes in Devil's Strand, where I spent upwards of 90 minutes in every other region. We then return the music box to the collector. He thanks us for finding all the relics, and the endgame officially begins. We don't get a power for this last item, because it's expected that after this you'll initiate the ending sequence of the game. The collector asks if he can come aboard to enact the final phase of his plan, and you're then hit with not 1, but 2 warnings that this is a point of no return. The collector climbs aboard, and we're off to the finale. Before he boards, the collector says, "Surely you know what I'm collecting these for." And he's right. I do. As briefly touched on before, there are collectibles in this game, but only about a dozen of them. These come in the form of messages and letters in bottles. They tell the story of a young couple who travel around the area, fishing and exploring the islands. However, the young man succumbs to the greed and darkness of the fog that enshrouds the land, and it costs the woman, his wife, her life. This man is you. Your memory's been wiped, but some dark, unknowable power has brought you back here, and placed the collector here as well to help you complete a ritual that will bring her back to life. That's a crash course on the whole affair, and it doesn't do its execution justice. Like I said, Dredge's pacing is strange. As you're going through the game, you're basically experiencing 4 separate story arcs, all with different characters and problems. In this way, Dredge's story is completely unremarkable. It's the environmental storytelling where the game really shines. Talking to NPCs, exploring these abandoned sites, and collecting these letters to slowly piece the mystery together feels really satisfying. When I finally unraveled the mystery, which I uncovered just before completing Devil's Strand, I felt like I had really solved something. Mysteries are hard to do in games, obviously. Return of the Obra Dinn is the exception, not the rule, but this mystery here in Dredge is pulled off exceptionally well. From here, the game has 2 endings. The standard ending and the secret ending. We'll go over the standard ending first. With the collector on board, he guides us to the spot in the ocean where our wife died. We throw the relics overboard, enacting the ritual, and in doing so, we summon our wife back to life. But also this. It subsequently destroys the entire world, and everyone we've met and interacted with is presumed dead. In the secret ending, you'll need to find the old mayor who's washed up on an island near Devil's Spine. He'll tell you to go talk to the lighthouse keeper at the Marrows. Talking to the lighthouse keeper will tell you the collector's up to no good. And if you then go to the collector and demand that he returns the book to you, it will be revealed that the collector isn't real. He's a figment of our imagination, a mirroring of us. The keeper then uses the light from the lighthouse to point to a certain spot in the ocean. And if we head there and throw the book overboard, we'll be swallowed by a giant fish. We die, but at least everyone else is spared. If someone doesn't know what they're getting into, I could see them being pretty underwhelmed by all this. The game doesn't have a traditional structure, and that includes no climax. The endings are true to the Lovecraftian themes of the game, however. So yeah, that's Dredge. It sort of came out of nowhere, and it's one of the biggest indie darlings of 2023. Not everything here is perfect, but if you want something that's equal parts relaxing and stressful, or you're just in the mood for some cosmic horror-themed video games, I'd give this one a shot. This is one hell of a debut from this studio, and I'm excited to see what they do next. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.